I found out I had once been pregnant by 2 men in 1 month before I ever learned the language of lawyers. If that open line makes you gasp, good, because the truth I tell you begins with a gasp and a coffin song and a mason jar of coins that smelled of lemon and regret. I am old now. My hands remember the weight of things, mugs with chipped rims, the heavy clasp of a locket, the cold coin that slips between thumb and palm, and I tell this story not to scandalize, but because the past is a ledger and every wrong deserves to be balanced. You will meet a young woman in these pages, me, who loved fiercely and unwisely, who paid dearly, and who later watched her own name be written in ink that smelled of wine and false witness. Promise me only this: listen with the patience you would give an old woman at her kitchen window, and believe that sometimes the world is crueler than the worst gossip. I was not born into silk and candelabras. My kitchen had a window that watched the alley like a patient neighbor. My table was scarred from canning jars and arguments. My pearls were not round and perfect, but uneven, the sort you buy because a young husband once thought them beautiful and insisted on them in a fit of generosity that would not last. For 30 years, I kept a mason jar on the top shelf, the one with a cloudy ring around its neck, filled with coins and the grocery list folded inside. That jar was my small altar, every rupee I saved for a repair, every coin given back in change after groceries, scraped and rinsed like conscience. When my daughter married into marble halls and chandeliers, I thought love had won for her. Her husband, soft-spoken, handsome, a man who walked into rooms like a breeze, promised her the world. I remember the first time she invited me to one of their dinners. The house smelled of jasmine, the silver shone like a small scandal, and I held my chipped mug, the one with the blue paint missing at the lip, and felt like an actor on a stage for the first time. She kissed me on the cheek, the way you kiss a relic, warm and distant. "Mama," she said, come, sit by me." I thought I had everything I needed. You must know who I was then. A woman who kept lists, who mended hems at midnight by the light of a single bulb, who knew how to pickle mango and make tea so bitter it could wake a man from a bad dream. I was proud but poor, ordinary and stubborn. I had a note tucked under my pearls, one that said, in handwriting that had the tremor of middle age, "Never be ashamed of where you came from." That note would become a lantern in the dark I did not yet see. Things began to bend, gently at first. She stopped calling on Sundays. Her laughter, which used to fly across the yard like a small bird, grew rarer. Once I asked if she needed a jar lid, and she closed the pantry door like a judge closing a file. "We're busy," she said, and the words stuck in my throat like a bone. I learned to knock before entering, as if the house was a courtroom and I had to petition for entry. My mason jar sat on its shelf, the coins chiming softly when I reached for them, and the pearls stayed in their velvet box, patient. Then the first small betrayal arrived, dressed as kindness. On April 3rd, 2 days before the gala Mrs. Hamid hosted for the charity, I received a letter, plain envelope, thin paper. It was a summons more than anything, a note informing me that I had been invited to sign some forms at my daughter's lawyer's office on April 6th at 9:15 a.m. The letter said nothing of the content. My hands shook. 9:15 a.m. is the kind of specificity that belongs either to trains or to the seals of fate. I dressed in the best dress the closet could afford and took the bus, my heart a small animal in my chest. The lawyer's office smelled of lemon oil and denial. There were certificates in golden frames and a receptionist whose smile was practiced, the kind you see only in catalogs. My daughter greeted me as if with a costume. Her cheek was perfumed and immaculate. "Mama, darling," she said, and I tell you she used darling like a clasp that locked me into the past. We sat at a table and a man in a gray suit placed papers before me. "This is a durable power of attorney," he said. "It will make sure your affairs are managed efficiently." He pushed a pen toward me. "Sign here." I read the words like someone reading a foreign prayer. Durable power of attorney, an instrument with teeth. It authorized another to make financial and legal decisions if you were unable. I asked questions. The lawyer smiled, and each smile was a brick placed in a wall. My daughter explained in a voice soft as gauze that it was merely practical, that everyone did it, that she would look after me. The pen hovered in my hand, and I thought of the mason jar and how it might be needed for new groceries, for medicine. I signed, more from necessity than understanding. I left with a stamped coffee cup and a promise that everything would be all right. That night, I removed my pearls and the tiny note beneath them. I locked them into a box I had hidden in the false bottom of my old wardrobe, the box I had kept since the war, when promises meant something like bread. That night I thought, foolishly, that the papers meant security. How wrong I was to think papers comforted the heart. The first microknife came the week after. I noticed small changes, a name missing from the guest list, a photograph in which I had been cropped out like a seam cut wrong, a dinner in which my spoon never touched the tablecloth because the host hated the sound of my hands. The mansion's corridors learned new footsteps, soft, deliberate, and my daughter's laughter began to include a new, low note that suggested alliance. I overheard whispers as a woman overhears the weather, the way the wind tells of a storm. "She's difficult," someone said, and the word was a P hidden beneath a shell. I never expected what I found in that drawer. A month later, on May 12th, just weeks after the durable power of attorney, I received a telephone call at 10:22 p.m., a time when lamps should be dim and the world smaller. It was from the bank. The voice on the other end recited numbers like litany: account balances, a certificate of deposit, an investment portfolio totaling about $230,000. A man's voice asked if I had authorized transfers. I felt the floor tilt. "No," I said, the word small as a bird. They told me there had been a change in signatories, my daughter and another name I did not recognize. I went to the house at midnight, carrying my chipped mug for comfort. The driveway was a pale river of light. I knocked, no answer. I entered through the back door, old habits die like insects, and found the kitchen dark. On the counter lay a single folded paper, a photocopy of a document stamped May 10th, an amendment to the last will and testament, naming my daughter sole executor and altering the distribution of assets. My breath left me. The pearls in my pocket felt suddenly heavier than any weight I had carried. I wanted to shout. Instead, I sank into the pantry floor and listened to the house breathe. Was this really my child's handwriting? Had she done this? The house was a stranger now. Its portraits looked down with accusing eyes. I thought of the mason jar above the shelf. How many coins would buy my silence? How many coins had I not yet counted? The second microknife, a whisper that became a plan. At a Sunday luncheon, someone mentioned repositioning the estate as casually as one might mention traffic. My daughter said, "For the best interests of the family," and the words wrapped around me like winter wool. She spoke of a trust, the language of glass houses, and of a certificate of title being updated. She introduced a young woman named Layla, who smiled with teeth like knives disguised as pearls. Layla became a frequent shadow. She was always near the ledger, near the envelopes. She laughed in a way that made me think of iron. I began to keep records, small things, the way a squirrel keeps hoarded nuts. On June 1st, I wrote down, received phone call from a bid, bank manager, 3:40 p.m., asked if I signed POA, no. On June 7th, receipts missing from grocery basket. On June 14th, letter found, unsent, addressed to Mama, saying sorry. The letter was a blade hidden in a pillowcase. It read that my daughter had felt pressure, fear of scandal, and that she had made choices to protect the family name. The handwriting trembled like a moth. I tried to speak with her, really speak, like the old way, when she would fall asleep on my lap and I would braid her hair. But there was always a gatekeeper, a filtered phrase, a hand on the shoulder, a polite dismissal. Once, in the drawing room, I saw a folder with the words Affidavit of Heirship on top. It was an ugly thing to see my name planned for the margins. I reached for it and my fingers closed on empty air. The folder was removed as if by a sleight of hand. The faces around me were civilized and monstrous. I never expected them to turn the law into a weapon. A week later, while cleaning the guest room, I slid open the drawer of the wardrobe I had used since my girlhood. The false bottom I had inserted years ago was still there, my sanctuary. I expected the pearls and the note. Instead, my fingertips brushed paper that was not my velvet box, but a small envelope with legal stamps. A copy of a durable power of attorney dated April 6th, and beneath it a document titled Limited Guardianship dated May 15th, signed by a notary public and bearing the signature of my daughter with a flourish I nearly recognized. The limpid calm of the pages made my vision swim. Who had the power? Who had signed for me? I kept the papers hidden in the mason jar, under the grocery list, as if the coins could muffle the noise of betrayal. I wanted to confront them, to ring the bell and demand answers, but every time I prepared myself, the house seemed to shift rooms like a chessboard. I waited for a sign, an apology, a touch, a tear. Instead came invitations without my name and a new will with a new executor. The third micro-knife, a phone call I heard but did not belong to. One night, at 11:03 p.m., I heard my daughter on the phone in the hallway, her voice low, conspiratorial. I moved toward the sound like a moth to a bulb. I could not make out the full conversation, but a phrase cut through. We'll quiet her, buy her silence, cheap. My mouth went dry. Cheap. The word was a fist in my chest. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the rip of paper, the clink of glass. $5,000, a male voice said. For the right papers, another replied. I sat down against the corridor wall, and the floor felt like a scale tipping. Was it possible? I asked myself that the daughter I raised for 20 years, the child I used to hum lullabies to, could discuss my life like a ledger entry? Could she truly reduce me to coin? My hands, which once kneaded dough, trembled. I felt smaller than the chipped mug in my cupboard. When I went into the bedroom that night, I opened the wardrobe and took out my pearls. I held them up to the lamp and watched them catch light in small, dishonest ways. I remembered a promise from long ago. I will not let you be swept under, I had said to my child once when she cried about a scar on her wrist. I had meant it. I had been sincere. How lovely, how naive I had been. For months, the coldness spread like frost on glass. Invitations came with polite notes. We regret that circumstances prevent your attendance. Financial statements arrived with stern stamps. My durable power of attorney, once an instrument of comfort, had been turned into a key that opened doors I did not know existed. The house, my daughter's house, learned new tricks. The locks clicked differently. The call bell was answered by strangers. The staff referred to me as the elder woman. My name diminished in their mouths the way light diminishes at dusk. I began to speak to the things instead of the people. I would talk to the mason jar and the chipped mug and the pearls as if they were witnesses. I wrote a list of every person who entered the house after me, names, dates, times. I wrote it as if each line would be a thread for a tapestry of truth. I pinned the list to my chest and slept poorly, and still the house did not break. At the charity gala on June 20th, I remember the date like a bruise. I arrived as a ghost. They placed me by the window where the light seemed to pity me. My daughter made a speech praising family legacy and thanked those who helped her preserve the estate. She spoke of difficult choices. My teeth hurt with the need to speak. After her speech, she passed by the table and there was a loose slip in her hand. She dropped it as one drops an errant napkin. I saw the corner flutter, a thin white question, and for reasons I cannot explain, I reached and picked it up. On it, in hastily scrawled handwriting, was a name I had not seen in years. Salim. Beneath it, a date, August 14th, 1968. My heart stopped. The name was like a splinter. Salim had been the first lover I loved fiercely, the man who had promised me a cottage and then left with 2 suitcases and a letter. He was the father who had whispered that the world would be kinder if I wore pearls. I looked at the date, and my mind did the arithmetic between months and the way a baby grows like a bud. For a moment the room tilted. I realized then that some stories do not end where we expect them to, and that betrayal can crouch in the shape of a love story. Dumas once wrote that revenge is a banquet best served cold. I felt the chill take the edges of my vision and wondered, not for the first time, whether banquets could be set with mason jars and chipped mugs. At the end of a life, or at the end of a sentence, there is always the ledger. I never expected what the missing pages would say, a Duma-like aside. There are sins that wear crowns and sins that wear aprons. Both are heavy to bear, and both one day must answer for their weight. I held the paper as if it were a match, and then I heard a step behind me, the soft, certain step of someone who knows where the matches are hidden. When I turned, the corridor held its breath like a church waiting for a confession, and there she was, my daughter, her profile lit by the soft chandelier, talking to a man whose voice I had not heard before in our house. He laughed, low and practiced, and my knees remembered every prayer I had ever made. She did not see me at first. She was busy with maps of money, papers, envelopes, the rustle of schemes. I hid my breath behind the doorframe and watched them speak of things that bite the hand that feeds them. "We'll make it clean," the man said. "We'll use the April 6th durable power of attorney as leverage and the May 10th amendment for the will. No one will suspect." My name, my tiny life, was a currency between them. I had so many names once, mother, girl, sacrificial lamb, and now I was being counted in columns. I waited until they left. I waited like a cat that knows the mouse will return to the trap. Then I went to the table and picked up the papers they had left. Careless, arrogant. There were photocopies, not originals, but the stamps were crisp. Notary Public, seal 0421, and a scrawled name I almost recognized. The amendment to the last will and testament bore the date May 10th, and an initial beside the clause that removed me from the primary line of inheritance. There was also a memo typed sterile, ordering that certain certificates of deposit and the certificate of title to the farmhouse, dated September 1st, 1979, be reallocated to a trust called Horizon Holdings. The bank account numbers matched the ones Abid had. Read to me on May 12th, a portfolio totaling about $230,000. I went to bed with a closet full of questions and the mason jar on the shelf like a meter of truth. The house, which had learned to disguise its cruelty, slept with the kind of greed only silence can smother. The next morning at 9 a.m., I remember the time like a wound, I took a bus to the branch where Abid worked. He met me in the lobby with an expression like a man caught between allegiance and conscience. "Mama," he said, using the word as if it might cover his complicity. He showed me bank ledgers and transaction logs. On May 11th at 2:05 p.m., 2 transfers cleared, $120,000 to an account under the name Horizon Holdings and $80,000 dispersed among several smaller accounts. A separate transaction recorded a $5,000 cash withdrawal labeled consultation fee. The words were honest. The numbers told their own story. How could this happen? I asked. I signed a form at a lawyer's office. But who changed the will? Abid sighed and slid a printout across the table. The printout showed the chain of custody for the will amendment. It had been lodged at the notary's office at 1:58 p.m. on May 10th, and a scanned copy had been uploaded to the law firm's server at 2:04 p.m. But the notary insists he was off duty that day, Abid said. He told me he was at home watching television, and that his seal number has been used before in forgery cases. I tasted the bile of anger mixing with a whiff of old tea. Forgery. The word crawled over the tiles of my memory and stopped at the pearls. I remembered a phrase I'd heard once in a cheap thriller. The law can be a sword in a rich man's hand. Here the sword had teeth and had cut me. I needed an ally who spoke legal like a second language. I found Aisha through a neighbor, a young solicitor with quick eyes and a gentleness that suggested she had read 1,000 stories of people losing what they loved. She met me at 4:30 p.m. on June 2nd in a small office smelling of paper and coffee. I put the photocopies before her. The durable power of attorney dated April 6th. The May 10th amendment, the limited guardianship dated May 15th, the bank printouts from May 11th. Aisha read the documents slowly, like one reads a map to hidden treasure. There are discrepancies, she said. The notarial certificate on this amendment has a registration number that belongs to Notary Office 0421. But their log shows no entry for May 10th at 1:58 p.m. The digital timestamp on the law firm server is 2:04 p.m. And the file was uploaded from an IP address traced to a cafe near the garage of the estate. Who? I asked. Who would do such a thing? Someone with access to both hardware and the appetite for greed, she said. Someone who knows how to fake a seal and who understands bank mechanics. Her fingers tapped the paper like a small percussion. We need the originals. We need CCTV footage from the law firm, the notary's affidavit, and the chain of emails. That evening, I sat by the kitchen window with the mason jar and the pearls. The porch light blinked like a small star that refused to die. I thought about the night years ago when I had been young and frightened and pregnant, taken in a time that seemed to belong to a different country. 2 men had loved me then. Salim, who promised a cottage and left, and a man named Hamid who offered stability but not tenderness. In a span of weeks I had thought both might be the father. The shame was a cloak I had worn like a winter coat, warm, necessary, and smelly. It was a scar I thought I had sewed shut. Now I realized they had found the cloak and were wearing it as a tool to threaten me. My daughter had used my past like a ledger entry. I told Aisha everything. The lullabies, the bracelets, the night I pressed my hand over my belly and whispered promises I could not keep. She used that, I said. She threatened me with scandal unless I signed. Aisha's eyes were small moons. We can contest signatures, she said. We can petition the court for an affidavit of non-execution from the notary and request forensic analysis of the ink. We can also demand CCTV. This will be messy, but it is possible. She folded her hands like a woman who prays with contracts. We began to move like conspirators. I watched and listened and kept small journals with dates and hours. June 3rd, 10:11 a.m., visited municipal notary, no record of signature at 1:58 p.m. May 10th, June 4th, 2:30 p.m., requested CCTV from law firm, denied. June 5th, 9 a.m., met a bid. Bank statements show Horizon Holdings deposit May 11th at 10:06 a.m. June 7th, 5:15 p.m., Layla's name appears on employee ledger as interim financial assistant, hired May 2nd micro cliffhanger. Never expected the name on the ledger to be her. A Dumas-like aside. When those who wear crowns of silk forget the weight of a common bowl, they believe the world owes them fealty until the bowl is broken and they must stoop to gather the pieces. We served legal notices. Like a woman hands out candy at Eid, Aisha wrote a subpoena for the law firm to produce the original documents and the CCTV footage for May 10th between 1:30 and 3 p.m. The firm stalled. They sent a polite letter saying, records unavailable due to personnel turnover. Aisha sent another, sterner. I felt like a mariner sending flags into the wind, begging the ocean to notice a small boat. On June 9th, Abid called me at 8:50 a.m. with a voice that had in it the tremor of a man who had seen a spider in his tea. Mama, there is a copy of a CCTV file, he said. It's partial. I cannot send it through the bank system, but there's a frame, 2:02 p.m., May 10th, showing your daughter with a man entering the law firm. The man carries a leather briefcase. Layla is nearby. I took the printed stills to Aisha. The man's face was in profile, sharp nose, small mole beside his left ear. It was a face I had seen before in the house at night. It was the man who had spoken of making it clean. I held the picture as if one might squeeze confession from it. We obtained an affidavit from notary office 10421, stating that their seal number 0421 had been cloned and used in prior forgery attempts. They certified, in a document signed and stamped on June 10th at 3 p.m., that no act of notarization occurred at their office on May 10th at 1:58 p.m. The law firm, under legal pressure, agreed to produce the CCTV footage in full on June 12th at 11 a.m., and Aisha arranged to have a digital forensic analyst present. We walked into that small conference room like soldiers, documents clutched like flags. The footage played. At 2 p.m., the door opened, and my daughter came in, her dress perfect, her smile practiced. At 2:02 p.m., the man with the briefcase arrived. He was not a familiar member of any household roster. His walk betrayed the confidence of a man who had rehearsed the script of betrayal. At 2:05 p.m., someone, an unknown hand, passed a folder to the receptionist. The receptionist signed, stamped, and uploaded. Aisha pointed and said, "Pause." She zoomed into the frame. The man handed something small, almost a pen, to the receptionist. The receptionist's hand trembled. At 2:06 p.m., the footage showed the man and my daughter leaning in close, whispering. The audio was muted, their lips moving like two conspirators reciting a vow. Then at 2:08 p.m., the man left, and my daughter stayed, smiling into the camera until the frame cut. I felt like a woman watching a ghost meet her maker. How many times had I been invisible to them? How many times had their eyes slid past me as if my existence were a shade of dust? Micro cliffhanger, found the photograph of the moment and could not breathe. We brought the footage to the municipal police on June 13th at 10 a.m. and filed a criminal complaint for forgery and fraud. A forensic handwriting analyst confirmed on June 15th that the signature on the May 10th amendment did not match samples from my daughter's known signatures, too slanted, too deliberate, like a mask attempting a smile. The notary's stamp had been imprinted using a device that had been in circulation on the black market for imitation stamps. The serial number had been cloned. Then came the small, ugly truth. The medical records I had kept in my wardrobe for solace, old hospital receipts. The birth register entry from August 1968 contained a marginal note I had never noticed. A midwife had written in a shaky hand, 2 possible sires. The phrase had seemed at the time like the muddled handwriting of an old woman, but now it was an arrow in the dark. My past, which had been my private wound, had a record that could be used to shame me. Had my daughter used this? Had she found the midwife's notebook and used it to bargain away my dignity? I needed proof beyond the forged stamp. I needed the truth of blood. Aisha arranged for a legal process to request DNA testing of the relevant parties, the estate's lineage documents, any living descendants, and, if possible, samples from people named in my memory, Salim, and the man who had loved me later, Hamid. Micro cliffhanger. I did not expect to find Salim alive. It was Aisha who called on June 18th at 6:45 p.m., voice trembling with a mix of triumph and fear. "Mama," she said, "we traced a ledger. The man in the footage, the one with the briefcase, has accounts linked to an old acquaintance, Salim." My heart tripped. Salim. The name had been a splinter for decades. She continued, "He's alive. He moved abroad after 1975, but there's an entry, $10,000 wired to Horizon Holdings on May 11th. We now have a link between the man in the footage and Horizon." The world constricted and then opened. The conspiracy had a heart, and it beat with the same rhythm I had once listened to under a mosquito net. Was Salim complicit? Had my daughter contrived to make me pay for the love I once gave? I thought then of the nights I had slept in a borrowed shawl, making small prayers for my child's future. Had those prayers seeded such bitter fruit? Dumas-like aside, the past is a ledger which, being dusted, sometimes reveals a signature that the living prefer to deny. In the bookkeeping of the world, every kindness may be itemized as a debt, and every debt may be collected with interest. We moved the case to court. A judge issued an order on June 20th at 9:30 a.m. for the immediate freeze of accounts linked to Horizon Holdings pending investigation. The bank complied reluctantly. It was as if the money felt the shiver of legal restraint and went quiet. The freezer in the house did not hum like it used to. I had the sense that the world paused, holding its breath for a verdict. The day we served the injunction, my daughter called me at 3:44 p.m. Her voice was silk with acid. "Mama," she said, "you're making a spectacle. Don't you understand what this will do? The family will be ruined." She had the nerve to say family, as if the estate, the employees, and the guests were a community, and not a ledger she had been ready to edit. "I want the truth," I said. "I want the originals." "You'll destroy us," she said. "We'll end up on the front page." "And what good would that do me?" I asked. "Would it feed my bones? Would it keep the light on in the kitchen? Or do you prefer the scandal to be your own?" She grew quiet. Then she hung up. Micro cliffhanger. I found a sealed envelope in the safe and did not open it. That night, I went to the house, quiet, resolved, and used my old key to open a drawer that had once protected my wedding band. Inside was an envelope with a wax seal I had seen in my youth, the insignia of a man who had loved theatrically. It was sealed with the initials S.A., Salim Ahmed. My hand closed around it like a trap. I put the envelope in my handbag and walked into the night as if moving through a field of glass. The next morning, Aisha advised caution. We had momentum, but not victory. For the climax, I had to choose. Do I storm the citadel and demand confession, or do I dig till the foundation crumbles? I chose the latter. We subpoenaed phone records, bank routing numbers, and the employment ledger of the house. The house's ledger contained small notes, payments labeled consultancy, and document handling on May 9th and May 10th. The amounts matched the $5,000 I had overheard. It was ledgered as miscellaneous. On June 25th at 11:12 a.m., while Aisha was in court obtaining permission for a DNA sample, I opened the wax envelope in my kitchen. Inside was a small photograph, the edges worn by years. It was of a young me, my cheek flushed, my hair tied back, and a man standing beside me, Salim, his arm around my waist. Handwritten on the back, in a hand I recognized now as his, for when the world forgets. Beneath it, tucked like a secret, was a thin paper, typewritten, bearing a sentence that read, "If ever my name is needed to prove lineage for my child, contact me at P.O. Box 324, Karachi, last known address, 12 Noor Street." It had been stamped on August 20th, 1969. My limbs turned to syrup. Salim had left country, but he had left breadcrumbs. He had left enough for me to call him, if he were alive. I called the P.O. Box, an old practice that still worked in corners of our city, and to my astonishment, they returned a message. Someone had recently picked up mail there. On June 10th, the postmaster, a man named Khan, told me an envelope with that name was received and a young man retrieved it. He left his card. He is representing Horizon Holdings. The card matched the man in the briefcase. It was converging like two rivers into a waterfall. The evidence mounted, forged, stamped will. Horizon Holdings account receiving $120,000. The briefcase man linked to Horizon, a $5,000 consultation fee, notary seal cloned. CCTV footage showing my daughter with the man, Salim's name on the envelope, and a post office showing Horizon's hand at the box 2 days earlier. Micro cliffhanger. Picked up the phone and called a name I had not spoken in 50 years. At 8:00 p.m. on June 27th, I dialed the number on the card. A man answered, voice like a chisel. "Hello," I said, the word small. "Is this Horizon Holdings?" A pause. "Yes," he said. "How may I help?" "I want to know who picked up mail at P.O. Box 324 on June 10th, I said. "And I want to know why $120,000 was transferred to you on May 11th. There was silence for a heartbeat, and then the man said, "We do not provide client information to strangers." His voice, to my old ears, was a lock. "Then I will go to court," I said. "You may," he replied, "but be warned. There are secrets that, once opened, do not close again." I slid the phone back into the cradle like a verdict. Dumas-like aside, the law is a lantern that reveals as much as it blinds. Revelation is a perilous act, for it lifts the veil, and sometimes the sight of what lies beneath is unbearable. And then the day came when everything was exposed. On June 30th at 3:33 p.m., in a modest courthouse room filled with papers and the smell of dust, the forensic analyst presented a printed report. The ink analysis showed that the May 10th amendment had been signed with a ballpoint pen type and ink, known to have been used in a particular stationery shop, one whose CCTV showed a man purchasing identical pens on May 9th at 5:20 p.m. The forensic audit of the law firm's server revealed that the upload at 2:04 p.m. had been made from an IP address that traced to a cafe frequented by the man in the briefcase. Bank routing numbers linked Horizon Holdings and the man via intermediary shell accounts. The chain was not a broken ladder. It was a bridge. Aisha closed the folder and looked at me with a softness that was equal parts triumph and sorrow. "You have the elements for a solid civil suit and a criminal complaint," she said. "If you want them public, now is the time." I thought of the pearls in the mason jar and the nights I had sung lullabies until my voice was raw. I knew then that I was no longer content to be the woman who collected coins and swallowed insults. I had reached the turning point. I would not be counted as an expense in my daughter's calculus. I had a choice to make, to be small forever or to make noise that would wake the household. Micro cliffhanger. Walked into the room where my daughter sat and dropped the file on the table. She looked up with the calm of a woman who believes she has already won. I placed the photocopies before her, the CCTV stills, the bank transfers, the notarial affidavit, the post office log, and the photograph of Salim with my handwriting tucked like a confession. Her face froze, then flushed. "Mama," she whispered, "what is this?" "I want my name restored to the will," I said. "I want you to explain the $120,000 to Horizon Holdings. I want the originals." Her mouth opened and closed like a bird's. I felt the weight of years shift underfoot. She stood up and moved toward me, eyes blazing. "You will ruin us," she said. "You will destroy everything I have built." "And if you are guilty?" I asked. "What then?" Her hands trembled. She reached for the teacup, plastic, expensive, and knocked it over. Tea spilled like a confession across the glossy brochure she had been reading. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking suddenly. "I did what I had to do. You have no idea what life costs." I thought of the mason jar and the chipped mug, and how cheap our sacrifices had been priced. I thought of the Dumas words that haunted me, that those who take must answer before a ledger of the heart. Then she laughed, a small, sharp sound, and said two words that split my world. "You are finished." Micro cliffhanger, ending part 2. I held up the photograph of Salim, and she reached for it. Then the lights went out. The lights went out like a curtain drawn across an old stage. One moment the room was a lacquered playhouse, and the next it was only breath and shadow. I felt the photo of Salim tremble in my fingers as if it were a small animal asking whether the world would still feed it. My daughter reached for the picture, and I saw her face in that sudden moonless dark, pale, raw, and for the first time, unglued. Then a thin clinical light clicked on at the doorway, and men in plain clothes moved like a tide into the room. "Inspector Khan," a voice said, firm as a ledger. "We have a warrant." The men wore the calm of people who carry the law as if it were a careful instrument and not a club. Aisha stood behind them, thin as a blade, her papers stamped, her brow creased with the kind of concentration that makes judges nervous. I felt the world tilt in the small way it does when someone removes a book whose page you had long since scrawled upon. "You cannot do this," my daughter breathed, the words as brittle as dried bread. She had leaned on the polished table, and the file I had placed there rustled like a trapped bird. "We can and we will," Inspector Khan said. "There's probable cause to suspect forgery and fraud. We have an order from Magistrate Farouk, dated June 30th, 2025, signed at 10:15 a.m., authorizing a search and seizure of any documents, computers, and safes related to Horizon Holdings and related parties." The name hit the room like a bell. I saw my daughter's eyes flick to the safe, her sanctuary of papers, the place she presumed impenetrable. "You are advised of your rights," he continued. "We will need to take statements." My daughter's face changed color in the dark, ashen like the inside of a lemon. She stumbled back and tried to gather her grace, but the men moved carefully and with purpose, as if the house itself had organized its defense. They opened the safe, and inside it, beneath glossy brochures and a bundle of invitation cards for an August gala, lay the originals. A notarial certificate with a shaky hand I'd come to mistrust, the original May 10th Amendment, and a small envelope with a wax seal marked S.A. I felt the breath leave me and yet remain, like a bell whose sound is still in the air. The inspector lifted the sealed envelope with gloved fingers and said, "We will send this to the forensic lab." He looked at my daughter, then at me, and something like recognition, pity or contempt. I could not tell, crossed his face. "Ms. Hassan, you are under investigation for conspiracy to commit forgery, fraud, and inducement. Do you understand?" She laughed then, but it was not the musical laugh I knew. It sounded like a coin in a jar. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You think I would—" Her words dissolved as Aisha produced a second folder, a printout of CCTV footage, time-stamped May 10th, 2:02 p.m., the still showing my daughter and the man with the briefcase in the law firm. the screen enlarged to show the distinct mole beside the ear I had come to recognize in the back of my mind. That mole belonged to the man whom Abid had traced to Horizon Holdings. That mole had shown up on a credit card slip. That mole showed on the photograph that had once been pressed in a wax envelope for reasons that astonished me. The man with the briefcase, Karim Malik, as the records would soon name him, was a fixer, an operator, the sort of person who builds bridges between fortunes and forgery. He was now on the floor near the doorway, hands cuffed, his briefcase open and its contents spilling like evidence: notary stamps, duplicates of seals, a small pocket printer, an ink pad, and a stack of legal-looking papers. "I'm only a consultant," he said to the inspector, voice flat. "I facilitate transfers." He looked at my daughter, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes, not for himself, but for what might be taken from him if he spoke. "I was paid to help with documentation," he said. "I never—" His sentence broke. "Then tell us who paid you," said Aisha. "Name the client," Karim swallowed. His throat worked like a tied rope. "Miss Hassan," he said. "She instructed me to ensure the amendments were in place. She claimed family security." He faltered, then kept going. "She arranged payment through intermediaries. Horizon Holdings was used as a front. The transfers were made on May 11, 2025, to accounts controlled by shell entities. I provided the cloned notary stamp, temporary, said the client, and the rest was handled." The words went into the room like a splinter. My daughter stepped forward in that sudden animal way people do when they must claw for dignity. "He's lying," she said. "He's a criminal." "He is being cooperative," said Inspector Khan. "We also have testimony from Notary Office Darber 0421 certifying their seal number 0421 was cloned and used. The forensic report dated June 30th, 2025, at 3:33 p.m. indicates the ink and digital fingerprints are inconsistent with legitimate notarization." He turned to me and quietly asked, "Mrs. Rahman, would you like to make a statement now?" I felt my voice like something small and long accustomed to being unused. I told them about the durable power of attorney signed on April 6, 2025, at 9:15 a.m., about the photocopies left carelessly on the table, about Abid's phone call on May 12th at 10:22 p.m. The room listened as if the truth were a currency they counted carefully before spending. I told them, finally, about the photo of Salim and why it had been kept in the wax envelope for so long. I revealed that the post office had a record of mail picked up from P.O. Box 324 on June 10, 2025, by a representative of Horizon. I told them about the $120,000 transfer and the $5,000 consultation fee traced to Karim on May 11th. As I spoke, the expression on my daughter's face hardened into something I had seen in books, a face that had decided to fight until the last coin was spent. She said to me in a low voice, "You should have kept your mouth shut. You chose to turn my life into a ledger," I said. "You should have thought about the numbers before you thought about yourself." I felt older than the walls. I felt, strangely, the robust peace of someone who has finally chosen to count. The inspector made notes. The men called for a van to take Karim away. And for a moment the house, our house, seemed to hold its breath and then exhale. Micro cliffhanger. She tried to pull the wax-sealed letter back from the inspector. They could not make my daughter confess that day, not with the bluntness I wanted, but they could take the tools of her trade away. The accounts were frozen by Magistrate Farouk's order, dated June 20th, 2025, and notices were served to Horizon Holdings and associated banks. Karim was held for questioning. The law, which is like a patient debt collector, began its work. In the days that followed, the household transformed into a scene I had known as a child when the neighbors left after a fight, the quiet buzzing of whispered speculations, the way servants lined up like armies unsure of their general. Layla disappeared and then reappeared, small and frightened. She claimed to have been a pawn, a scared young woman caught between the orders of superiors and the instincts of conscience. Abid, who had twice risked his job to help me, became a quiet hero in my mind. He would not take a bow. Aisha prepared the civil suit, claims of fraudulent conveyance, conversion, and unjust enrichment. She drafted a petition to void the May 10th Amendment and to restore my name to the line of inheritance. She filed for emergency relief to unfreeze the farmhouse deeds and to restore my right to live there should that be necessary. The court docket grew like a vine. Petitions, affidavits, forensic reports, subpoenas. On July 5, 2025, Judge Farouk issued an order for the production of all communications between my daughter and Karim Malik and any intermediaries. The order included phone records dated May 15, 2025, and email metadata for the law firm. When the emails came, the truth spilled like a stream through a cracked dam. Messages showed a string of instructions, payments, and drafts forwarded from an account registered to my daughter to an anonymous Hotmail and then to a private email owned by Karim. The language was clinical, transactional. Ensure amendment is notarized. Ensure will is amended to reflect executor Ms. Hassan. Use Horizon for transfers. Another message read, handle mother discreetly, $5,000 to guarantee compliance. The words were less words than proof. They were a needle that pricked the air of pretense the house had worn. It was then that the question of Salim returned with a tenderness I had not expected. I had called him on June 27, 2025, and a voice answered, slower than time. We spoke in cautious fragments. He was startled to hear my voice again. He had left the country long ago, worked in another land, kept a P.O. box as if it were an anchor to something left behind. When I told him what had happened, his voice grew small with a sadness that was not mine, but that I accepted as a kind of familial grief. I never gave them permission to use my name, he said quietly. I left because I could not promise, and I am sorry for the pain that caused you. If they used my name to threaten you, I will help. I owe you that. He wrote an affidavit on July 8, 2025, declaring that while he had been the father of my child, yes, the records and the eventual DNA would confirm it. He had no involvement in the forgery or the transfers. He swore that his name had been used without consent for the purpose of intimidation and blackmail. He included an old letter he'd written me on August 20th, 1969, my own photo tucked into the envelope, and he provided a sworn statement that he did not collect any payments and had no financial interest in Horizon Holdings. His handwriting, like a scar, gave a certain authenticity to the story that no computer could mimic. A Dumas-like aside, there are debts of the heart that no ledger can reconcile. Confession is a currency, but it buys mercy only when the heart is honest. Karim, in custody, and perhaps feeling the small terror of those who have misjudged their leverage, agreed to cooperate with the prosecution on July 10, 2025, in exchange for a reduced sentence. He disclosed a long list of payments and clients, shell accounts used to route funds, names of intermediaries, and, most damning, records of a June 9th meeting in which my daughter had instructed him to make the legal edits quietly. The prosecution now had the handwriting, the digital fingerprints, the notary affidavit from Nagaro 421, the CCTV footage, the banking trails, and the sworn statements of Salim. The house that had once felt impenetrable now resembled a building whose foundation had been undermined by a mole. But the law is slow in the ways of drama. It moves with the weight of precedent and the caution of judges who do not enjoy surprises. Still, the courts can be theaters, and on July 15, 2025, in a packed courtroom with reporters on one side and a woman with a chipped mug on the other, Judge Farouk read a provisional judgment. The May 10th Amendment was to be voided pending a full trial. The assets frozen were to be held until their legitimacy could be established, and my daughter was restrained from transferring any further property or making any changes to family trusts without court approval. The room exhaled like a sea. My daughter, though, would not go quietly into the margin. She hired a high-powered attorney who painted her as a woman under enormous social pressure, a modern heroine forced to make hard choices for the sake of family preservation. The press liked the drama. They wrote articles with headlines that attempted pity and condemnation in the same breath. But the documents were stubborn things. They do not yield to narrative flair. They lie in black and white and cut like saws. Micro cliffhanger. She accused me of a crime she had herself invented. As the criminal case proceeded with hearings set for August, the community watched with a kind of morbid curiosity. The staff, who once referred to me as the elder woman, began to greet me with a different tone, respect perhaps, or the wariness of people who have been reminded that dignity can be reclaimed. I went to the farmhouse on July 20th and sat on the old porch where the wind used to bring the smell of mangoes and mosquito coils. The deed to the farmhouse, originally dated September 1st, 1979, had been recorded under my name for decades. I had assumed it was safe in the quiet way one assumes a heartbeat will continue. The documents had been tampered with, but they could be restored by the court. The judge had already ordered preliminary relief, which included the return of my right to reside in the farmhouse if necessary. I thought then of the pearls and of the mason jar. The mason jar had been more than a jar. It had been my ledger, my memory, my small sacrament. I took it down from the shelf, counted the coins, felt their cool edges, and felt something like wealth that did not want to be spent but wanted only acknowledgement. I decided to open a small trust account, documented legally in the light of day, to ensure that my needs would be met without me being beholden to anyone. Aisha helped me set it up on July 25th, 2025, a simple segregation of assets of about $15,000 wired from a frozen account that the court allowed for living expenses. It was not the $230,000 I had been robbed of, but it was mine, and my hands trembled as I wrote the account number down like a name. The trial began in earnest in late August. Evidence was presented: bank records, email chains, CCTV footage, salivary. DNA samples. For the record, I submitted mine for comparison. The law required it to establish lineage and to remove any cloud of scandal. And testimonies. On August 31st, 2025, the lab report confirmed what I had always suspected in the hush of my heart. Yes, Salim was indeed the biological father of the child I had carried in 1968. The DNA match was conclusive. The midwife's scrawl in the hospital ledger, 2 possible sires, was an honest ambiguity of a time before precise tests, not an accusation of moral failing. The court read the lab report out loud, and my cheeks burned, but not with shame. They burned with the slow heat of vindication. The public reaction was a strange mix of pity and admiration. The scandalous headline that my daughter had threatened became, in the end, a factual statement rather than a weapon. But the weapon had been used regardless. She had thought scandal would terrify me into silence. Instead, the truth, once disclosed, brought the sword of the law down upon her schemes. On September 10, 2025, the court rendered its verdict in the civil matter. The May 10th Amendment was void ab initio. The notarial certificate was declared fraudulent. The transfers to Horizon Holdings were unwound to the extent legally possible. Kareem Malik was ordered to disgorge funds and to provide full cooperation with criminal prosecutors. Magistrate Farouk's written judgment, an elegant, damning dozen pages, concluded that the defendant had used deception, forged documents, and undue influence to obtain a wrongful advantage. Remedies included the restoration of estate distributions. According to the prior legitimate will, legal costs awarded against Horizon and the conspirators, and a restraining order preventing my daughter from contact with certain estate managers until a final hearing. Then the criminal case moved more quickly than I had expected. With Kareem's cooperation and the digital forensics laid bare, district prosecutors charged my daughter with conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery under the Penal Code, and attempted coercion. The trial, which began on October 2, 2025, was ugly in the way of family tragedies that the public likes to witness. The defense tried to argue coercion, social pressure, and the headaches of maintaining a public image. The prosecution had the ledger of messages, the words "ensure amendment," "use Horizon," "keep mother quiet," and the $5,000 consultation fee. The jury, when it spoke, was not unkind, but it was resolute. On October 18, 2025, the verdict came: guilty on counts of conspiracy and forgery, sentencing to be scheduled. The courtroom, where I had once felt invisible, now watched me as if I were a lighthouse. I felt gratitude to the law that had sided, with its slow and imperfect hand, for truth. I felt sadness for the daughter who will have to live with what she had done. But I also felt a quiet, fierce joy that the mason jar sat on my kitchen shelf, and the pearls lay in their velvet box, and I had not been erased. There was poetic justice, as promised by the merciless pen of fate. My daughter was stripped of her position as executor and replaced by an independent trustee appointed by the court. Horizon Holdings was subjected to a forensic accounting. Assets were frozen and recovered to the tune of a portion of the $120,000. Karim Malik was sentenced to house arrest and heavy fines for his role after a plea agreement recognizing his cooperation. Layla, who had been a small cog, was granted leniency in exchange for her testimony and now works in community outreach. She told me once, tearful, that she had never wanted to be part of such sharp things. I reclaimed what I had lost in the only way that mattered, by telling the truth and living it. I restored my name on the property deeds. The farmhouse, weathered and sweet-smelling, was officially mine again on November 2, 2025, by court order recorded at the Municipal Recorder's Office. The magistrate's clerk stamped the deed with a neat hand, and I felt the paper's weight as if it were a medal. I moved back to the farmhouse with a few boxes, my chipped mug, the mason jar now slightly fuller due to some returned funds, and my pearls around my throat like a small private coronation. A Dumas-like aside. Justice is not the thunder that falls in a single night. It is the embroidery worked slowly by patient hands. Those who cut others' cloth with knives will one day find their patterns altered. People asked me afterward what I would do with the money that remained after legal costs. Would I buy a new set of pearls? Would I travel to the place where Salim had once promised me a cottage? I answered with a laugh that surprised myself. I invested in small kindnesses. I set aside funds to build a community pantry in the neighborhood where I grew up, a place that would accept mason jars full of coins and give back bread and dignity. I donated to a women's legal aid fund, Aisha's idea, so that other women could afford to stand when the law seemed like a mountain. I also set money aside in a Legacy for the Little Ones Trust to fund education for children in the community. The rest I kept in a bank account whose number I could recite without needing anyone's help. My daughter's sentence was not a jailer's revenge, but a consequence she would live with. A fine, a suspended sentence contingent on restitution, and a term of community service helping organizations that support elders and families. She lost the public gloss she had courted with chandeliers and galas. She came to me one wet evening in December, 2 years after the initial deceit. No, her crisis had not been that long, but she came humbled and asked, with a voice brittle as frost, for forgiveness. I looked at her and saw the child I had once sung to and the woman she had become, proud, frightened, and very, very tired. I will not throw stones in the dark, I said. But you must live with what you did. Make restitution where you can. Find a way to be useful. I offered her a cup of tea, the way one offers a hand to someone who must relearn how to stand. She accepted and sat at the edge of the table. And we spoke, not as conspirators, but as two women bound by blood and by the terrible, beautiful fact of family. The final balance sheet of this story is not simply numbers. The mason jar sits on the shelf with a new coin I found in the couch, small, bright, and unlikely. The pearls are slightly warmer against my throat when I wake. I walk in my garden and hear the rustle of jasmine, once again my neighbor. I am not vengeful. I am corrected. And I have learned that dignity is not a possession to be signed away on a day when one is tired and afraid. Dumas taught me many things from the pages I have read in my youth. That revenge can be a banquet best served cold. Yes, but also that mercy can be a feast given freely to the hungry. If there is a moral to this long, crooked road, it is this. Truth has weight, and so does silence. The silence we keep to avoid scandal may sometimes protect us, and sometimes it makes us complicit in our own erasure. Speak when it is safe to do so. Keep records in names and small jars of memory. Love does not require us to sacrifice our dignity. And when the ledger of life becomes unbalanced, take the stubborn step to correct it. The law will not always unwrap our wounds, but sometimes it will open a door for justice to enter. If my story touched you, if the voice of an old woman, telling of pearls and mason jars, made you remember something of your own, then share it with someone who needs the courage to speak. Comment below with a truth you keep hidden and a lesson you've learned. And if you'd like more stories from this old heart, stories of small rebellions, of lost love, of the way dignity is regained, subscribe. There are many more ledgers in the night, and I have not finished balancing mine.